There are crimes that shock us. There are mysteries that haunt us. And then there are cases so twisted, so deeply disturbing, that they shatter our understanding of human nature itself. Today, we're diving into one of those cases, a crime that left investigators paralyzed, a community traumatized, and a nation asking questions that still echo decades later. This is the story of the Hinterkaifeck murders, a case so bizarre and terrifying that even after a century, it remains unsolved. What happened on that isolated farm in Bavaria? Who could commit such calculated brutality? And why does this case still send chills down the spines of seasoned detectives today? The year was 1922. The place was a small farmstead called Hinterkaifeck, located about 70 kilometers north of Munich, Germany. It was home to the Gruber family's 63-year-old Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia, their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, and Victoria's 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph. They also had a maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had just started working there days before the murders occurred. The previous maid had quit 6 months earlier, claiming the house was haunted. She reported hearing footsteps in the attic when no one was there. Andreas had dismissed her concerns as superstition. He would soon regret that decision. In the days leading up to the tragedy, Andreas Gruber noticed something deeply unsettling. He discovered footprints in the snow leading from the forest to his farm, but none leading back. Someone had come to his property and hadn't left. Or at least, they hadn't left through the visible route. Andreas searched his property thoroughly, but found nothing. Then came the strange sounds. He heard footsteps in the attic, just like the former maid had described. His neighbors later reported that Andreas seemed disturbed, mentioning that he'd found a newspaper on his property that none of his family had purchased. Someone unknown had been on his land, reading his newspaper, and possibly watching his family. Despite these alarming signs, Andreas told no one outside his immediate household. He didn't contact the police. This decision would prove fatal. On the evening of March 31st, 1922, someone lured Andreas, his wife Cecilia, his daughter Victoria, and young Cecilia to the barn one by one. Using a mattock, a farming tool similar to a pickaxe, the killer struck them down with brutal efficiency. The autopsy would later reveal that young Cecilia had survived the initial attack. She lay in the barn, severely wounded, for several hours before the killer returned to finish what they'd started. She had torn out clumps of her own hair in agony, a detail that still haunts forensic experts today. But the killer wasn't finished. After murdering 4 people in the barn, they entered the house where 2-year-old Joseph and the newly hired maid Maria were sleeping. Both were killed in their beds with the same weapon. 6 people murdered with calculated precision. And then came the truly disturbing part. The killer didn't flee. They stayed at the farm for days. Neighbors noticed smoke coming from the chimney. The farm animals were fed and cared for. Someone was eating meals in the kitchen. One neighbor even reported seeing someone moving behind the windows. When mail was delivered, it was collected from the mailbox. Whoever had committed these horrific murders was living in the house with 6 corpses, maintaining the appearance of normalcy, caring for the livestock, and going about daily routines as if nothing had happened. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was something far more sinister. It took 4 days for anyone to realize something was wrong. On April 4th, when young Cecilia failed to show up for school and neighbors couldn't get anyone to answer at the farm, a search party was organized. What they found was a scene of unimaginable horror. The 4 bodies in the barn were covered with hay, deliberately hidden. The 2 bodies in the house were found in their beds. The murder weapon, the mattock, was left at the scene. But the killer was gone, vanished as mysteriously as they had arrived. The investigation that followed was extensive but ultimately futile. Over 100 suspects were interviewed. The police pursued numerous theories. Some investigators believed it was a robbery gone wrong, but nothing of significant value had been taken. Money and jewelry were left untouched. Others suspected Victoria's husband, Karl Gabriel, who had been reported killed in World War I, but whose body had never been positively identified. Could he have returned, found his wife with another man's child, 2-year-old Joseph, whose paternity was questioned, and taken revenge? Forensic examination of Joseph's skull showed similarities to Andreas Gruber, suggesting an incestuous relationship between Andreas and his daughter Victoria, adding another layer of darkness to an already disturbing case. Another theory centered on the farm's previous maid and her boyfriend, but they had solid alibis. Suspicion also fell on neighbors, vagrants, and even Victoria's rumored lovers. The police brought in clairvoyants and psychics, desperate for any lead. In 1923, the bodies were exhumed and their heads sent to Munich for examination by pioneering forensic scientists who were developing early techniques in criminal anthropology. The heads were never returned to the bodies and were lost during World War II, creating yet another mystery within the mystery. What makes this case particularly haunting isn't just the brutality of the murders or the number of victims. It's the psychological profile of the killer that emerges from the evidence. This was someone who knew the farm, who could navigate it in darkness, who could lure victims to the barn without raising alarm. This was someone patient enough to kill 6 people systematically over the course of an evening. And most disturbingly, this was someone comfortable enough to remain at a crime scene for days, living among the deceased, maintaining routines, feeding animals, eating meals. This level of cold calculation suggests either profound psychopathy or a familiarity with the victims that borders on the incomprehensible. Modern criminal profilers who have examined the case suggest the killer likely knew the family intimately. The lack of forced entry, the ability to lure victims without struggle, and the comfort level displayed in staying at the scene all point to someone the family trusted. The fact that the killer fed the animals suggests someone who either cared about the farm or wanted to avoid drawing attention through neglected livestock. The deliberate covering of bodies in the barn shows an attempt at concealment that contradicts the brazen decision to remain at the crime scene. These contradictions paint a picture of a killer operating under a complex psychological framework we still struggle to understand. Over the decades, new theories have emerged. Some researchers believe the killer was someone from the local community who managed to hide in plain sight during the investigation, protected by the chaos and suspicion that fell on outsiders. Others point to the political turbulence of post-World War I Germany, suggesting the murders could have been politically motivated, though no evidence supports this claim. The truth is that 102 years later, we're no closer to solving this case than the investigators were in 1922. The farm itself was demolished in 1923, too tainted by tragedy to serve any purpose. The land was left vacant for years before being sold and redeveloped. Today, nothing remains of Hinterkaifeck except photographs, police records, and the enduring mystery of what truly happened during those dark days in March 1922. The case files remain open in German archives, a permanent reminder that some questions may never be answered, some evil may never be explained, and some cases are simply too disturbing to solve. What happened at Hinterkaifeck represents one of true crime's most chilling examples of a perfect mystery. Every answer leads to more questions. Every suspect is eliminated, yet someone committed these crimes. The killer's identity died with them, leaving behind only the haunting evidence of their presence and the unforgettable horror of their actions. If this case has gripped you the way it's gripped investigators for over a century, make sure to subscribe to this channel. We dive deep into history's most mysterious and disturbing true crime cases, bringing you thoroughly researched content that respects the victims while exploring the darkest corners of criminal history. Hit that like button if you want to see more unsolved mysteries explored with this level of detail and care, and drop a comment below telling us what unsolved case you'd like us to investigate next. There are so many stories waiting to be told, so many mysteries still demanding answers. Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next investigation.